How can we use difficult conversations to heal and bring people closer together through restorative justice circles? So let's find out today on how we do that. Welcome to the art and science of difficult conversations, where we believe when you communicate better, you live better. As always, we're your hosts, Chris and Lucie, where we believe just in helping people navigate the hardest conversations in their personal and professional lives. Today, Lucie and I have the real pleasure to chat with somebody who's really warm professional. He goes around talking about how to communicate and how leaders of color, which I believe in for sure, but how leaders of color can step into their own and be authentic and tell their story because they matter. And so we're talking with a real one today because he loves restorative justice circles. And so today we're honored and really excited to share our conversation with Frank Velasquez Jr. Frank is a storyteller, a social justice champion, and he truly believes that everyone's story matters. Frank, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Chris and Lucie. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
So tell me, when you were growing up, were you growing up and did you think, I love restorative justice circles, I just want to do this when I get older?
No, but I think I always had the capacity for it.
Okay.
And I didn't know what they were. I would say as recently as 2021 was when the work that I was already doing, I didn't know 90% of it. I was already doing restorative circles.
That's awesome. And so you do that through some of the things you founded, For the Hood and Ascending Leaders of Color program. Tell us about what you do through those.
Yeah. So I founded For the Hood was a lot because of the trajectory I went on. So the more I was moving into leadership spaces, and again, preaching to the choir here, it is a wider space. The higher you go up into leadership, I think the stats are only 17% of the C-suite executives are people of color. I noticed it, and as I started moving up into that space, that's when I ran into a lot of, just running into a lot of things where I had to fit in and where I was actually stripping what I felt, what made me who I was, makes me who I am, to be honest with you. And so through some court, and again, I'll be as brief as possible, but just had some successes, had some areas where we moved on from each other. I led a nonprofit from 2017 to 2020. And it was that reflection point when I left that organization that I recognized that I wasn't ever my authentic self. It was my first time working in the nonprofit sector, first time ever as an executive director / CEO. And I think I spent a lot of time trying not to mess up. And that was the reflection point when I left, was I was never really me. And so there was a desire to be in that space where I could be my authentic self. Again, there's not a lot of places where I can fully do that. And it still took me about 2.5 years more to create For the Hood. But the beauty of For the Hood is that I get to be who I am. It's my business. It's a reflection of my values. And I, as much as I can, get to be reflective of what For the Hood stands for.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Like it's so difficult for leaders of color, people of color, to authentically be who they are in these spaces because, we're always going to feel like an outsider and there's these different expectations placed upon us. So how did you build the muscle of learning to speak authentically and storytell and get other people to also share their same?
My journey in leadership started when I started working at our local community college and then moved into the nonprofit sector, then even did some contract work for a little bit, and then worked at our local chamber of commerce. So in that journey, I'm in spaces that are largely white folks. And again, I have nothing against white folks in general. What I'm saying is that this country has been designed to favor a certain group, and I'll even say favor a certain sex, white cisgender males. That is what our workplaces look like. And that's whatever they created or designed out of that is what all the other groups have to accept. And so that is really what kind of started me on my trajectory of not always feeling that I fit in or that I had to change who I was. And so that really did then point to building For the Hood. But even then, I didn't have my program, my flagship program in mind just yet. And that flagship program is called Ascending Leaders in Color, which really is a restorative circle. It's a container where I call it the 3 R's for leaders of color to be authentically real in that space, to reconnect with other leaders of color, and to reclaim every part of who they are as they rise up in leadership. So your question was really about how did I build my authenticity? It's still a work in progress. I get to only in the last year have I fully ventured out to do For the Hood full time. I'm also very aware of spaces I'm in. If I'm looking for grants or I'm looking for whatever, sometimes I can see that I have to talk a certain way, that I have to dress a certain way. And so it still exists in that space, but I'm slowly trying to chip at it where I get to be as authentic that I want to be, wear the clothes that I want to wear, talk the way that I want to talk, and just being still aware of the knowledge of the spaces that I have to move through, that I navigate through. So yeah, I would say my authenticity, I think with largely any person of color, is going to be that journey of where finding the spaces, finding the people, finding the network and support where we can have these conversations, where we can feel more authentic than we were before.
I'll share a quick story just before. I know Lucy has a question, but my wife is white. And when she first moved up to Boston with me, I had been going to a Chinese church at the time, so mainly Chinese people. And so she went in for the first time. And at the end, I said, what'd you think? And she's like, I think there was only like 4 other white people in there. It was very strange just to be like, I was like, well, guess how I feel most of the time.
That is so funny. That is very true.
It happens to all of us from different perspectives.
Yeah.
I've been to, now it's Ramadan celebrated, so I went to Iftar. I was invited by some friends, and also I was the minority there, but everybody was very welcoming, so I was lucky to have that experience. But I have a question, Frank.
Yes.
For somebody that has never heard of Restorative Circle, how would you describe them? And is that something recent, or have they been around for a while?
That is such a good question. And I probably knew this in the back of my head, but when I saw you draft the question, I was like, oh, I need to look this up. And so it was really cool to see that these have been for thousands of years, indigenous traditions. Then I started thinking about like movies I've seen or things that are already new, especially connected to indigenous traditions, where they're literally in a circle. And let's say they're dealing with an issue and they're having that conversation in a circle. And I was like, that is really cool. So I did not immediately know that, but once I looked it up, everything seemed to make sense at that point of what a restorative circle was and how they originated.
Thank you. So it sounds like that's been a proven tradition for thousands of years.
It has been. And it's really cool that these practices are still happening, or I should say have been reignited, because I really do feel like this is a key. Restorative circles are keys to having the hard conversations and moving us through kind of where we are currently, sadly.
Yeah. What would that look like to have a restorative circle in an organization?
Chris, you touched upon it a second ago. I think just the mere practice of what a restorative circle looks like is any type of, whether it's a strategic plan, whether there's some interpersonal conflicts. And I'm not saying it's a cure-all, because sometimes it can't be based on who's in the circle, but the mere process or practice of it would look like creating agreements, before you have the conversation, framing what the conversation is going to look like, asking very directed type of questions. I don't know if you've heard of this. I feel like you have, Chris, particularly because I know your background, but ORID type questions. So like objective, reflective, interpretive, and decisional type questions really help move through the process. So when those things are a part of the process within an organization, if they're wanting to have these difficult conversations, that's how I feel that's what it would look like.
Is there a minimum amount of people?
I would say 10 to 15 is ideal, because that still allows everybody to be a part of the conversation. And I will add this as well. Having a guided facilitator is really important, because I've been in spaces where the facilitator talked a lot, not leaving space for the people to talk themselves. And so having somebody who has that skill of really just looking at everybody, seeing who hasn't spoken yet, and giving them opportunity to speak without any pressure. The way I typically say it is, oh, Lucy, I noticed you haven't said anything. There's no pressure to say anything, but I want to make sure that I'm giving you space if there is anything that you would like to add. And typically, I'd say 9 out of 10 times, they're going to say something because they've been given the opportunity and recognition to have that opportunity.
I love it. Well, another question comes to mind. Did you get some training in facilitation, or was that something that naturally comes to you through experience?
That's a really good question because I feel like I don't experience imposter syndrome, but I know there's folks, again, like Chris, who've practiced this. And I do feel there was a element of it came natural. I'm a naturally inquisitive person, and I'm also aware of kind of like when people aren't included. And so I think those are the pieces that were naturally there. But I'm not going to say that it was 100% intuitive. One of the organizations that I contracted with in 2021 named it a restorative circle. And so then I started to look at the practices of it, particularly the agreement part was something that I had never done or used before. And so it was really cool to just incorporate that and see even how much better that process looked like in that space. So again, I've always done small group facilitation, very highly skilled in those areas. But once I learned what restorative circles was, then I did my homework and really started to do a lot more to ensure those pieces were present, to ensure that the conversation, I call it, was protected. I don't call these spaces safe because I don't know if they are or not, but I can say it's protected. We're in this space, and it's a protected space. And I just want to make sure that I'm still not assuming that people in that space are safe.
What makes it distinct from regular group facilitation of like conflict resolution or like a strategic planning meeting? Like what makes it different that makes it so powerful?
I feel it's the agreements. I think when you have people co-create these agreements, there's a level of accountability to hold to them, and they're posted. So if it's in person, I keep them posted. So I think it's just there, and there's a reflection of like, oh, we came to this. So I think I have yet to experience, and I probably should knock on wood, where they didn't hold to the agreement. They hold to the agreements. There might have been some discomfort, but pointing people back to those agreements recenters folks, and it's helpful. So I think that is the biggest difference in regular conflict resolution. I've been parts of those where I was one of the two people that was having a problem with somebody, and I don't recall them ever using these types of agreements. They just went right kind of into it. And so any type of conflict resolution that I do, I have agreements because it really does then set the tone for how the conversation is going to go.
I'm curious, what kind of agreement, for example?
Oh, yeah. So because there's a purposeful way that I want to do it, sometimes people don't know what, let's say, the base agreements could be. And I don't even like calling them base agreements, but I start with 4. So one is speak from the heart, listen from the heart, say just enough, and trust your process. And so those are good starter ones because then I can add more to it. I can say, these are your experiences. So we want you to speak from your heart. We want you to speak from your heart. The listen from the heart is where you're not listening with judgment, accusations. It's their story. And so we honor their story by listening from our heart versus maybe there's a trigger word that happened or that was expressed. The third one is say just enough. I usually say that because we're going to have a balance of people who really like to talk and people who, maybe are a little on the quieter side. So I say just enough in 2 ways for extroverts. You got to land the plane. There's 9 other people in this space. And then for introverts, I challenge them in a good way. I say, we want you to say a little bit more than you normally would, and the last one is trust your process. And I recently changed the adjective. Is it the adjective? I can't remember what it's called. It's not the adjective. I used to say trust the process, but now I say trust your process because it is their process and how they move through it. And I want them to believe in themselves as they're moving through it. And then what happens after that, Lucy, then I'll invite them to add to it. And so typical ones they'll add is be respectful, be open-minded. Vegas rules, the confidentiality is a big one. Have fun, and some other ones. And so that really, again, the co-creation of that, it feels that we worked on this together because we did. And that also, I believe, helps with holding to them as we're moving through conversations.
Have you ever heard the variation of the Vegas rule of What's said here stays here, but what we learn from here, we take from here.
Oh, no, I have not. I like that.
I saw that a few years ago, and I just use that all the time now because I think it's
I
a
love
nice
that. I love
variation of that. Can you think of an example of like an organization you brought this into and kind of what impact it had? Just kind of having
Yes.
everybody start talking through this.
Yes, this actually happened last Friday, but it actually happened even a year ago. So I'm working with an organization. They're a food bank network in the state of Arizona. And so they wanted to bring people who had the lived experience of food insecurity. And so I pitched, before they brought me on, I pitched the idea of using restorative circles. I said, we don't need like a group of 30 people. I said, we need like intimate groups of 10 per group, maybe. And so we ended up having 4 different groups. And then I asked them pointed questions. And that happened a year ago. What happened last Friday was now the second phase. And so we took the information that came out of those listening sessions a year ago and said, all right, we're ready for phase 2. We're going to create a community advisory council around food insecurity and really build their skills so that they can have conversations about their experiences in a trauma-informed way, but in front of like elected officials, community leaders. And to see the gelling of them happen so quickly in that first meeting, it was amazing. And I'll even share one little joke about it. So I had those first base ones, the lead from the heart, or I'm sorry, speak from the heart, listen from the heart. As they started to create their own ones after that, they added from the heart, from the heart. And so it was like more than half of them said like, be open-minded from the heart, be respectful from the heart. And we were laughing. And it just was a really unintentional way of gelling them further. And just that team dynamic. And mind you, these are folks who even some in their adulthood experience food insecurity, and just their passion around food access, their passion around listening to everybody else's story. It almost felt like, what's the word? It almost felt like I shouldn't have been there listening to it. But the whole purpose was to hear them. And I will even say at the end, we did an emotional checkout. A couple of them used the word heavy. And so then I pivoted really quick, and I do this with my programs as well, recentering their joy, because I didn't recognize or realize that it was feeling heavy for some of them until they voiced it. And so we ended the session on Friday with a quick recentering of joy. And again, that was helpful. I was, all right, what fun thing are you going to do this weekend? Because it was a Friday. And people shared what they were going to do. And immediately that joy started to come out again. And so I know I can't control how people feel, but the simple acknowledgement of it, I think helped. And so, yeah, just seeing that group gel, and that's just the first meeting. We have 5 more to go. So I'm really excited to just kind of move through this space with them and help build their skills as they become food advocates, food access advocates.
Yeah. There's so much gold in what you just said, both in like the process, the value of it, but also just how you navigated and kind of like the heaviness, because I think that's a lot of leaders, that's what they worry about the most is when it gets heavy, what do I do with this? Let's go back to the beginning. Where at the beginning, was there anybody that was like, I don't know what this is about, this seems too hokey for me? Or was everybody bought in? They're like, yeah, I'm down for whatever.
Are you talking about the Friday session?
The year ago when you first did the listening session and you first proposed this?
Yeah. So I will say it almost was an immediate yes. That once we created the agreements and framed things a certain way, I said, look, we're not going to have a lot of PowerPoint slides up. We're going to just be in the space. We physically were in a circle for the first listening session. The following 3 were virtual, but it still worked. Once you create those agreements, there feels like a sense of protection. Like, okay, they're going to thoughtfully listen to my stories. And that's what I did. And then the questions were very pointed in the sense of like, I'm trying to like share some experiences of food access that you've had. And so that can be a very hard thing to maneuver through. But because the agreements are there, now the first person shares their story, there feels like, again, a protection. Oh, well, Chris shared their story, so I'm going to share mine. And just watching that bounce through really then further gelled or solidified what the expectation was. I know we also use Chris. We said, hey, we're recording the sessions, but only for transcription purposes. We're not using names. So I think all of the prep work that we did or the framing of it also helped them share their stories. Because then we would just say, participant 1 said this, participant 2 said that. So I think that helped them feel connected really quick. And I was really proud of watching this process that I know I had experienced and that this organization trusted me with to hold these listening sessions, because we got a really good amount of information. And I am so grateful to these folks for sharing their stories in such a, heartfelt way.
And that's the power, right? Like this, when you hear other people's stories, that's
Yeah.
when we feel that connection of, either I've gone through something similar or I can relate to that feeling in some way.
And then fast forward to what happened on Friday. I want to say 5 of the 7 participants were from phase 1. And so they already knew the process. And so it was really easy for them to further gel because they had already experienced it a year ago. To see that happen, and on Friday, the 2 people who didn't participate in phase 1 immediately just kind of gelled with it, which is, again, incredible. You set the stage, you set the container, and then what comes out can be really magical.
Welcome to the end of part 1 of our conversation with Frank. Stay tuned for next week.